This podcast is brought to you by Darktrace, a global leader in cybersecurity AI. Darktrace's AI understands your business in order to stop the disruption caused by cyber breaches, including ransomware and insider threat. Learn more at www.darktrace.com.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar is taking some well-deserved time off. Coming up this hour, it's not a week without talking about the shrinking gap between traditional finance and crypto. Plus, we're going to hear from one tech CEO who's focusing on the fight against ransomware. And next hour, we hear from the CEO of Land's End. He talks to us about the outlook for the holidays and how tough it's been to find employees. All that and more to come over the next 2 hours, but we begin with the current issue of Bloomberg Businessweek magazine. It's the cities issue and features stories about cities all over the world, the challenges they've faced throughout the pandemic, and what they'll look like years into the future. It also takes a close look at one area of Seattle, a commercial district that has undergone trial by virus. The pandemic changed the heartbeat of urban areas across the U.S., and few more so than the Pike Pine corridor of Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. I spoke with Noah Buhire, finance reporter for Bloomberg News, and I was joined by my Bloomberg Quick Take colleague, Katie Greifeld.
Well, it's, I think, what a lot of people would imagine as a vibrant at all hours, retail, arts, commercial district. There's music venues, a ton of restaurants. It's not giant buildings, but you've got a lot of, 4 to 6, 7, 8-story apartment blocks that have retail at the ground floor. So it was really the part of Seattle that felt most city-like outside of downtown.
And what happened over the last year as the pandemic took hold and commuters started staying home and not going to those restaurants? And then just a few months later, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, activists took to the streets there to demand racial justice.
Yeah, so look, it was an interesting neighborhood to follow for all those reasons you just mentioned. A lot of the businesses in this corridor were the kinds of places that relied on a vibrant street life and people being able to get together. And obviously, the pandemic made that difficult. And the other thing that was interesting about this neighborhood is that there are just a ton of smaller businesses. So, Amazon has one of their grocery stores there. There's a Starbucks Reserve Roastery in the neighborhood. So there's some corporate presence. But there were also a lot of small, scrappy businesses that just had to figure it out. With this piece, I followed a number of them through the last year and a half to figure out how they did it. Because while a number of businesses did go under during the pandemic, a lot managed to get to this point through the generosity of customers, through government assistance programs, and just a lot of scrappiness that I don't think people have fully appreciated.
And so, Noah, it's a great piece. And one of the reasons why it's such a good read is because you did track a group of 4 businesses over the past year and a half. And I'm curious, you mentioned the scrappiness of the businesses and the business owners, but I'm curious if there was a uniting common denominator in how they were all able to get through the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really think it is the constellation of factors. It was these were established businesses with loyal customers, and to the extent some of them were able to do GoFundMes, government assistance was just absolutely key. Programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, pretty much everyone took that money. It was either a form of bridge financing or to get them to other federal grants, or it was the thing itself that helped get them through. And then, I think another underappreciated part of this is that we're talking about a city where a lot of people have been willing to get vaccinated. And even though we've had pretty strong public health restrictions here in Washington State throughout the pandemic, people were willing to go back to this neighborhood when those things lifted, because we're talking about a city where, more than 75% of people 12 and up have gotten their jabs.
Well, it's interesting because one of the elements of this that really sticks out to me, that really caught my attention, is the graphical representation of the change in weekly visits from 2019 that are in here. Charts that just show how foot traffic has not returned to retail establishments there, to restaurants there, even after the vaccine rollout, to music venues, for example. In some cases, restaurant visits are still down, even after vaccinations, 50% from 2019. How are these business owners dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do want to highlight that the data here is really interesting. We were able to get foot traffic data on about 350 locations around this neighborhood. Most of them were, commercial establishments, and I think that data really does show you, like you said, that things are far from being back to normal.
Yeah.
And the reason these businesses are still, any of these owners will tell you things are not back to normal. I mean, they are still very much in the thick of this, and we're, going into the fall when things like outdoor dining are going to be harder to do, and frankly, in Seattle, just not comfortable because it rains so much here. So I think that's a big part of this story, is that these businesses have been resilient, but they are by no means out of the woods yet.
That was Bloomberg finance reporter Noah Buhire. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Coming up, the CEO of Kraken Bank on closing the gap between crypto and traditional finance. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic from Bloomberg Radio.
Now, this past week was a particularly notable one for crypto. We had the Bitcoin flash crash, where the crypto suddenly plunged 17% in just minutes. David Knitsky is the CEO at Kraken Bank. It's one of the largest crypto exchanges with over 8 million users worldwide. They've had about 1 million new signups in the second quarter of 2021. I spoke with David, and I was joined by my Quick Take co-host, Katie Greifeld. We started by asking why he's chosen Wyoming for the company headquarters.
Wyoming passed the first of its kind new regulatory license here for a special purpose depository institution. It's a state chartered bank. And up until now, crypto companies have really been round peg, square hole into existing licenses and regimes that didn't make a ton of sense. And we're kind of locked out of the existing banking world. So for that reason, we're bringing the U.S. business under a more certain, more formal, and better regulatory regime, as well as expanding into new opportunities, new products and markets. As you see, everything's converging between crypto, neobanks, fintech, traditional. And so we want to be at the heart of that market as well.
But you do call yourself a bank?
Yeah, we are a state chartered bank.
And so Wyoming is interesting, obviously has positioned itself to be a crypto hotbed. Where does that stand with the rest of the United States? Are other states moving towards Wyoming, or is Wyoming really an outlier at this point?
Wyoming definitely got the ball started, but the ball rolling. But a number of states have, let's say, borrowed liberally from the Wyoming playbook and enacted their own version of a similar charter. And it's provoking federal regulators to take action as well. That's kind of the beauty of our republic and our system here, where states can be the laboratories of innovation and push things forward faster than the federal government has. So it's really been a spark that's moved the whole industry forward.
David, you say that Kraken will be the first United States crypto bank. I'm wondering the problem that you're setting out to solve here. What is not being met by traditional finance?
Yeah, so in the traditional regimes right now, you can either apply for 50 state money transmission licenses, or you can try, and none of them have like crypto-specific language. They're built for like Western unions and fintechs of the world. And then, or you could try to pursue a banking license. But the federal regulators, the OCC, the FDIC, have been inconsistent about that. And they don't have written rules about how they're going to treat crypto that has a dedicated supervisory and oversight manual. We just want to know, hey, this is how we're going to be regulated and what our expectations are, and we can meet them. So for those reasons, the lack of clarity around some of the stuff in other states is really suboptimal. And banking has been a traditional problem for crypto. Kraken's lucky to have a swath of good third-party banking partners, but there's nothing like vertically integrating and controlling your own destiny direct to the Fed.
And so, David, I've always been curious, how do you scale? Obviously, there are regulatory hurdles, but in terms of the average American who maybe only has a passing understanding of what Bitcoin and what cryptocurrencies are, how do you convince them that this is the next, wave of banking? This is the next evolution of how you handle money. How do you bring that message beyond just the cryptocurrency community?
Yeah, well, one, the cryptocurrency community is growing rapidly, and more kind of mainstream adoption is taking place. We think that's going to continue. So on the one hand, the market's coming to us. But on the other hand, this banking license lets us offer online mobile checking accounts and savings accounts and traditional equities brokerage, things like that, mainstream America are used to. And so if you put that side by side for crypto, it's a kind of a great conversion mechanism.
You do know on Kraken Bank's website that you are not FDIC insured. The money that you put in, the crypto you put in, is not FDIC insured. Explain why that is a little bit and why you think that consumers who might be a little concerned about that should or should not be.
Yeah, if anything, there are advantages to our structure. So the way that the SPDI charter works is we are required to be a fully reserved, fully backed bank. So we take customer deposits and we keep 100% of it in cash. So we don't have the types of market or credit risks or insolvency risks that the FDIC was meant to protect against. So as a result, we're kind of exempt from having to apply for that. There is no, risk because we're not lending money out into mortgage portfolios. We're not putting it into, we're not even putting it into treasuries, let alone longer duration or riskier instruments.
Given the increased interest in crypto, the way we do see traditional financial institutions starting to embrace it, if you expect to get significant competition from the big names in banking and even community banks.
Yeah, I expect more and more to realize the opportunity and come to the market. We welcome them. Not particularly concerned about it, as you see any new technology medium. Normally it's the folks who are kind of that native to that medium are the ones that do best. I think it'll be pretty challenging for institutions and incumbents to really adopt to crypto fully. But I think it does help the market more broadly. And I do think the question is the existing financial industry coming to crypto rather than crypto coming to the financial industry.
And so I want to switch gears and talk about stablecoins because I'm kind of obsessed with them. For those listening who don't know, stablecoins are cryptocurrencies that try to maintain a fixed exchange rate with a fiat currency. Usually it's the dollar. They try to maintain a one-to-one peg. They've come under a lot of scrutiny lately. Some people might have heard of Tether. It's the largest stablecoin. It was supposed to be backed one-for-one by US dollars. We learned in May that it wasn't, that it actually holds a ton of commercial paper, maybe 31 billion if you look at Tether's market cap. I'm curious what that could look like going forward. We know that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is concerned about stablecoins. Some Fed policymakers have made worried noises as well. I'm curious, David, whether you think that we could see regulation in that space.
Yeah, I always expect regulation in new financial markets, no doubt. I think the stablecoins are a net benefit and a boon. In fact, the U.S. should love stablecoins. It is the best way to maintain our dollar reserve and hegemony, and for our kind of global reach and global economic clout.
And so the U.S. should love stablecoins, but we know that the U.S. doesn't love stablecoins. And you do have banks like Barclays warning that this could raise some really thorny issues for the Fed. If there is a run on Tether, people trying to redeem their holdings, that could cause Tether to dump commercial paper en masse. And the commercial paper market is crucially important to just the functioning of companies. So I'm curious, what would get the U.S. on board if they should love stablecoins?
It's not surprising that a bank would be wary of something that definitely is competitive to it. And there are certain areas of stablecoins that, could potentially use a little bit more transparency, no doubt. And in fact, even Tether, which is certainly the more questionable ones in the market, it's getting better. And it is definitely changing its kind of balance sheet to these concerns. So I do think that's going to change over time, and there's going to be more transparency, whether by force or just by market dynamics. So I expect that to happen sooner rather than later.
That was David Knitsky, CEO at Kraken Bank. Still ahead on Bloomberg Business Week. Who wins and who loses in the age of tech titans? We're going to hear from the man who literally wrote the book on it. This is Bloomberg. This podcast is brought to you by Darktrace, a global leader in cybersecurity AI. Darktrace protects over 5,000 organizations worldwide from cyber threats such as ransomware, insider threat, and attacks on cloud applications. Its self-learning AI understands your unique business in order to identify and interrupt cyber attacks in seconds without disrupting day-to-day activity. Learn more at www.darktrace.com.
Broadcasting from the financial capital of the world, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovit on Bloomberg Radio.
Many people may think that they understand the secrets to the success of Silicon Valley and the FANG stocks, but the truth is, well, a lot more complicated. That's at least according to investment banker and Columbia Business School professor Jonathan Nee. He's the author of the new book, The Platform Delusion: Who Wins and Who Loses in the Age of Tech Titans. We spoke to him earlier in the week. I was joined by Bloomberg's West Coast correspondent, Ed Ludlow, and we started by asking him if there's any secret to the success of these big tech companies.
Calling them platforms is a way that makes people feel comfortable that, well, they're all doing great, and that's the secret. But the reality is many more platform businesses are unsuccessful than are successful. And when you look at the sources of strength of each of those businesses, they are quite different.
So let's start with Apple, for example, because there's a lot of news about Apple, including the fact that on the 14th, we do expect the company to unveil hardware. And as my colleague Ed Ludlow, my co-host on the show, reported, one of the key people in the Apple's car program, has been poached to go into Ford. Let's start with Apple. What's the secret to Apple?
Well, look, at the end of the day, Apple is a product company. And in fact, the vast majority of Apple's revenues has been since the death of Steve Jobs, has been from a single product, the iPhone.
Yeah.
That is still the case. That is still a majority of their revenues. But what makes it so phenomenally profitable is, in fact, the platform aspect of the business, which is really the App Store that has created an ecosystem of wild and extraordinary profitability. And the new leadership post-Jobs has done a phenomenal job of monetizing that ecosystem and monetizing that product. But you know what? In the world of products, eventually everything is a toaster. So if you don't come up with a new one, a radical new one, at some point you're not going to be able to wring out any more juice from that lemon. There's more to go. It's a phenomenally profitable and fantastic company, but eventually you've got to come up with something new, which is why you hear them throwing out crazy ideas like, well, I'm going to build a car. Healthcare is the next thing for Apple, which is fine in theory, but there's no evidence that those are things that Apple is very good at.
How do you assess this basket of mega cap tech companies as we come out of the pandemic? It seems they found some relevancy, some stickiness, but what is your main takeaway of the fortunes of those companies from COVID-19?
Well, in many cases, what you've seen is phenomena that were going to happen eventually being pulled forward. People being willing, even your grandma's willing to buy groceries online when the alternative is getting a deadly virus. So it definitely helped a number in permanent ways, but it's very important with a number of companies, not just the big ones, to distinguish things that are pulled forward and permanent and things that basically gave companies that frankly didn't have much reason to survive an extra whiff of life, and it's not going to last after things normalize. That's not the case with any of those guys. All those guys are going to be here for a long time and are going to do well, and mostly it's a pull-forward phenomena. But at least two of the 5 FANG companies are in incredibly competitive marketplaces. Netflix and Amazon, at least the part of Amazon that is in e-commerce. And those are both very low-margin businesses, and they are both facing more competition than ever before.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, Jonathan, because you write in The Platform Delusion, Who Wins and Who Loses in the Age of Tech Titans, that there is this myth that these companies are invincible. and that discourages competition. Where are these companies vulnerable?
Well, each one has got a different Achilles heel. Let's start with the strongest one. You said Google sits on top, and it sits on top for a reason. In search, it's a mind-blowing business. It is unlike many cases where people talk about learning and AI and big data, where actually in practice those things don't do very much for you. In the case of Google, it does do a lot for you. And the thing about Google that's so incredible is it keeps doing more and more as it gets more and more activity. So in search, it's a monster. But what's their Achilles heel? It's that in anything other than search, their track record is miserable. I mean, miserable. A great example of that is their attempt to compete with Amazon in AWS. It started trying to compete with AWS at exactly the same time as Microsoft did.
Right. That's Columbia Business School professor Jonathan Nee. He's also the author of the new book, The Platform Delusion: Who Wins and Who Loses in the Age of Tech Titans. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Up next, we stay with the tech industry but move closer to cybersecurity. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic from Bloomberg Radio.
It seems like each week we learn of a new hack or attack on some computer network, whether it's on a pipeline, a meat processing facility, the subway system here in New York, or even the UN, as we learned just this week. We spoke to Wendy Thomas, the CEO of the global cybersecurity company SecureWorks, just as she was appointed CEO this week. She spoke with me and Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld.
Well, always feeling great about leading an organization that does such amazing work. SecureWorks is all about securing organizations globally. And frankly, it's just a privilege for me to continue to fight the good fight with SecureWorks.
What do you see as the main challenge right now, not just facing SecureWorks, but facing each and every company that operates right now in a world where it seems like each and every day we hear of new ransomware attacks, new cybersecurity threats, and companies essentially being taken to their knees for ransom?
You've absolutely hit on one of the prevailing trends in the security space. And, it's easy to take away from all these headlines that the attackers may be winning the fight. Frankly, we see many threat actors now, offering ransomware as a service. And so for, $126, you can purchase hacking tools on the dark web. And when the barriers to entry are low and the rewards are high, you see proliferation of this type of crime. In fact, the ransomware payouts in 2020 globally alone were about $20 billion. So that is a top security concern for all of us. The stats show that there's a ransomware attack on a business every 11 seconds. So these attacks are, as you said, hitting closer and closer to home for all of us as supply chains and food and gas are disrupted. And we see headlines as business leaders and feel a responsibility to protect our organizations going forward. And here's the thing, it's such an opportunistic crime. It can feel when you're attacked that you were targeted. But frankly, they're very rarely targeted at a specific company or even an industry. They're targeted at companies that are an easy target.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, the fact that it is opportunistic, that it's not necessarily companies being targeted or singled out. I mean, how should businesses take that information that it is opportunistic? How do you even protect your business against that?
What you want to be is a very expensive and hard target to hit. Right? Ransomware is all about a very lucrative criminal enterprise. And so if you set the foundational protections in place in a business, it is not complex, but it is diligent to protect your business with good security hygiene, strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, being very guarded about your IT admin rights. Those are great ways to prevent the easy entry because companies are really only as strong as their weakest link, right? That adversary only has to find one crack in the armor to get in. And so we believe that you have to do everything you can to be a hard target for them. And at SecureWorks, we also believe that eventually they're going to find a way in. Some employee will probably click on that phishing email. And so you've got to have complete visibility to detect anything and everything across your digital estate. And then because speed is of the essence, you've got to have the ability to contain those threats in an automated way before real damage can be done.
So if it is inevitable that someone will gain access to a company network, what's the next step that the company needs to take to minimize damage?
That's where the ability to be prepared for when they're in. And so the time to detect them has to be absolutely rapid. And then the ability to have a platform like the Taegis platform that SecureWorks has, it tells you what good looks like, right? It says, this has happened, this is who the threat actor is, this is the asset they're targeting, and it's important to your organization. Click this button, it's time to contain this threat immediately. So it's that mean time to remediation that is important, so that threat actor doesn't have the time to get to a place where they can deploy that ransomware and cripple your organization.
We've really seen a proliferation of attacks over the past few months. I'm curious, why now? Why 2021 have we seen just such a big uptick in hacks?
I think there's a combination of an increase in hacks, and certainly the shift to remote work increased the attack surface in the midst of the pandemic. And there were opportunities for those threat actors to also use the fear or lack of information around the pandemic to create different kinds of attack vectors, phishing emails around vaccine answers and that kind of thing. But I also think that the impact of those has been much larger, impacting everyday citizens, like the pipeline attack. And because of that, the headlines and the focus of even government has increased as a result of that.
Wendy, whenever I'm talking to a cybersecurity expert, someone in a position like yours, I want to ask, yes, about what companies can do, but also about what we can do as individuals. I mean, we carry around these phones with so much information on them. We have our email accounts that, allow us to reset passwords if we forgot a password. What is the best way that we can think about protecting our own personal data when it's out in so many places? What are some best practices for us?
Well, first of all, I say that security is a team sport, right? And so one of the things that's important to SecureWorks is increasing cyber literacy generally, because if you make yourself, again, a difficult target, then the likelihood that you'll be opportunistically targeted is lower. But your information does have value, your contacts, your banking information, and to the extent that you don't put multi-factor authentication in place around your particularly banking or other sensitive information or application access, you're creating unnecessary exposure. Strong passwords, not your dog's name, not anything around your family. So there's just the same kind of hardening of compromise and access that companies need to do. There's the same thing that individuals need to do. And frankly, just be aware of where you're putting your information, especially on a public computer in a library or such. And that kind of awareness and vigilance will help keep you safe.
Okay, well, I definitely need to go update a few passwords, but I do want to get a check on the SecureWorks business because you took over effective as of September 3rd. SecureWorks reported earnings on September 2nd, and they were a little bit below analyst expectations, both second quarter revenue and the forecasts going forward for the third quarter and the 2022 fiscal year revenue below what analysts had been expecting. And the stock is still up about 28% for 2021, but definitely a rough week yesterday, plunging about 14% for the week. So Wendy, I know you just took over, you're still getting the seat warm, but I'm curious, what's your priority going forward? How do you right the ship?
So we actually have the right answer for today's toughest security challenges. And inside of the SecureWorks business, which was founded about 20 years ago, we first started this fight with really a services-based approach to security. And as we've talked about, because of the technology evolution of the tools in threat actors' hands and the pace of this fight and the need for automated, rapid, machine learning fueled detections and orchestrated remediation to prevent the kind of massive breaches and costs that we see in modern times, about 4 years ago, we started to build a modern security platform called Taegis that is all about taking that full detection and response automation capability and putting it all together in a way that can solve the real security challenges of today. That business inside of SecureWorks' total services business is actually growing incredibly fast. 200% in second quarter over last year, hit 100 million ARR just 2 years after we launched the solution. And so while we are shifting away from some of the services that we previously offered as part of the total revenue, the right answer and the true value for customers in the security space is this emerging XDR platform. And that's a ship we're going to keep sailing.
I'm wondering about breakdown of revenues in fiscal year 2021, where we are now. 76% of revenue comes from managed security and threat intelligence. 24% comes from security and risk consulting solutions. How do you want to see that mix change?
We would like to see our XDR solutions, our Taegis solutions, be about 90% of our total revenue. And we shared that as a long-term model.
When you say long-term, how many years are you thinking here?
Well, we don't have an exact number out there. That's a few years out. And I think the importance of continuing to provide some degree of consulting services to help customers really mature their security program is an important overall part of the business model to keep them secure.
And so, Wendy, you made the point earlier that the attacks that we've seen, they haven't been targeted. They've been more opportunistic in nature versus companies being singled out. But I'm curious, have you noticed any industry or any type of company being particularly vulnerable to ransomware attacks?
We absolutely have seen certain industries that are more vulnerable. If you think about where the security adoption started many years ago, financial services companies were a lucrative target, and they had a lot of compliance requirements. They became security hardened very quickly, and you don't often see them in the headlines today. What you see, again, are those, unfortunately, easier targets. So you see now, unfortunately, educational institutions, universities, even K through 12 school systems under attack, or manufacturing companies who have had to go through very rapid digital transformation. And so their exposure of their attack surface has increased. We unfortunately see that those organizations, if they have not partnered with someone like SecureWorks to help put that security in place, they are quite vulnerable and often successfully attacked.
That's SecureWorks CEO Wendy Thomas. That wraps up the first hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week from Bloomberg Radio. I'm Tim Stenovec. Coming up in our next hour, the CEO of Land's End joins us to talk all about the struggle to find employees. Plus, we talk gender diversity with the CEO of Heineken USA. This is Bloomberg. This podcast is brought to you by Darktrace, a global leader in cybersecurity AI. Darktrace protects over 5,000 organizations worldwide from cyber threats such as ransomware, insider threat, and attacks on cloud applications. Its self-learning AI understands your unique business in order to identify and interrupt cyber attacks in seconds without disrupting day-to-day activity. Learn more at www.darktrace.com.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hello, I'm Tim Stenovec. My co-host Carol Massar is off this week. Plenty ahead in our second hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Just as kids head back to school and retailers start thinking about the holiday season, we're going to hear from the CEO of Land's End. Plus, the CEO of Heineken USA joins us to talk all about gender diversity in the beer business. All of that to come, but first up this hour, the classic payphone. Think about what it evokes. For so many years, it was really the only way for any of us to communicate with one another when we weren't at home or when we weren't at work. But with smartphones nearly everywhere, it's relatively rare that the payphones that are still out there are even used. Joined by my colleague Ed Ludlow, I heard from David Dudley, a writer for Bloomberg City Lab, who profiled a photographer who's working to document surviving payphones.
So I spent the day with a gentleman named Eric Kunzman, who is a photographer and a photography professor in Rochester, New York. And a couple of years ago, he became sort of fascinated by the fact that it seemed like the neighborhood that he had moved his studio to was full of payphones, and he hadn't noticed that in other parts of town. This is sort of a lower income part of Rochester. And he started to sort of take images, portraits of the payphones that he saw in the neighborhood, usually in front of convenience stores and gas stations. And this sort of expanded into this sort of kind of a global quest that he has launched to document every single payphone in Monroe County, New York.
I'm a Londoner, right? I think phone box, I think iconic red phone box, I think tourism. But as part of this process, what do you learn about any neighborhood's given phone box? What does it tell you about the economy, about the people in that place?
Well, Eric sort of theorized that some of these phones were basically just sort of forgotten. They'd been sort of installed in the 90s or earlier, and because no one had renovated the building that they were attached to, or no one had bothered to call the phone company and say, hey, could you remove this thing? The machines themselves had sort of persisted. So it was sort of like a geography of the more sort of economically left behind parts of the city. And as part of his project, he sort of mapped all the phones across the county and overlaid that with economic data and other information. So he became sort of interested in sort of what the whole kind of social kind of geography of telephones meant, which sort of made this more than just sort of an aesthetic project. It was sort of a social documentary.
I do find that the idea that this is based in Rochester, New York, just fascinating. As you point out, it was the home of George Eastman, the founder of Eastman Kodak. And at its 1970s peak, the photography giant employed about 50,000 people and fueled a quarter of the city's economic activity. It's absolutely a different picture in this day and age, David. And I'm wondering the juxtaposition of that and the symbolism there, that this project is being done on film, first of all, in a place where Eastman Kodak was for so long a stalwart of the economy.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's sort of part of the conceit here, is it's sort of this convergence of obsolete technologies that Eric really still finds value in. He is a film photographer diehard. He has sort of a shrine to Kodak film in his studio. So he's shooting these things on an old Hasselblad camera on film, using this product that is so associated with Rochester and with the wealth that sort of built the city. And it's sort of part of his sort of thesis that there is value in things that might not be cutting edge technology anymore, but are still useful and still serve different people.
I really encourage Bloomberg Radio listeners to go on Bloomberg.com onto the Bloomberg terminal and look at the actual photographs themselves. As Tim said, shot on film. But there's something missing from every single photograph. There are no people in any of the shots at all. Why is that?
I didn't want you to sort of think about who was using the phone. He wanted you to sort of leave that to your imagination. Because really, and those of us who are of an age when we used payphones more regularly in the 80s and 90s, it was a public amenity. Everyone used the payphone. And now it's sort of perceived as something as a communication device of last resort for people who really have no resources. And he really wanted you to sort of think about who might need that phone. And so it's this sort of gallery of unpeopled landscapes where you sort of see the phone as part of a kind of a streetscape. But yeah, there are no people there. They're used sometimes. He's got data from the telecom that still operates them that says that that most of these phones are used a couple times a week still. The handful that are still working, a lot of them are just sort of corpses. Their handsets are broken, or the insides have been removed. But some of them still work, and those that do still do find people who need to use them.
What did the company that oversees these phones, that these phones belong to, Frontier, tell you about the status of the phones?
It's not really a priority for Frontier Communications right now. This is a telecom that is pivoting to fiber optics and cutting edge technologies, but it also happens to have about 1,500 of these phones scattered around the county. It's unlikely that it's a major profit center. Let's just say it's a very, very declining business. There are less than 100,000 payphones across all of the United States, probably a lot less, and it's very much a part of the telecommunications business that has really been left in the past.
That's David Dudley from Bloomberg City Lab. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Coming up, we explore the pandemic's impact on learning trends for women with an executive from Coursera. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
It's hard to believe that students going back to school are entering their third year of classes amid a pandemic, and it's unclear at this point what exactly things are going to look like when it comes to remote versus in-person learning. Coursera is a company that has been working on online education for nearly a decade, way before we were even talking about the pandemic. The company works with hundreds of companies and universities to offer professional development courses, and we spoke to Dr. Emily Sands, the Vice President of Data Science at Coursera, on what learning trends we're seeing and, of course, on the impact that the pandemic has had when it comes to online learning and skilling.
Brief context on Coursera to situate the report. We were co-founded by professors Daphne Koller and Andrew Ng, really with the mission to provide universal access to world-class learning. And we believe new skills can open doors to new opportunities for folks from a range of backgrounds, and giving more women around the world access to top quality learning, including in STEM and digital fields that are fast growing in the labor market, has been a big part of our work since the beginning, inspired in no small part by Daphne's leadership. So the report was really inspired by the macro labor market trends we've been seeing amid the pandemic, in particular with women dropping out of the labor market and the unemployment crisis that has disproportionately impacted women. And so we took a look at how was that feeding through to their learning decisions, and what does that imply about where the labor market might be headed.
So, Emily, what are the skills that women are looking for when they turn to online learning? Are they trying to change jobs? Are they trying to get ahead in the jobs they already have?
Yeah, so, we are seeing overall women turning to online education at higher rates than pre-pandemic, and actually their growth in online learning is outpacing that of men during the pandemic. So that means the gender gap in online learning is starting to close. This is a worldwide trend, but it holds through to the U.S. as well. And one of the things that's really striking, you can look at overall course enrollments from women. They're increasing from about 42% in 2019 to 49% in 2021. So almost half of all course enrollments now are coming from women. But I'm heartened to see that this includes really strong growth in female enrollments in STEM courses and in entry-level professional certificates. So some of the most job-relevant content. To your question, we do see women looking to advance in their current careers, especially those that are already in technology-oriented fields like data and computer science. STEM course enrollments in the U.S. from women increased from about 35% pre-pandemic to about 42% in this year. But we're also seeing a lot of women investing in online learning in order to transition to new careers, especially entry-level professional certificate enrollments for women have really exploded. They were about 27% of those enrollments were by women in 2019, and it's now a much healthier 43% in 2021, as during the pandemic, women are looking to transition to those entry-level roles.
We saw with the JOLTS, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, that this imbalance just continues to exist between the number of jobs that are available and the number of people who are unemployed. They're not necessarily meeting. There is this imbalance that still exists. What does your data tell you about the way that people can use Coursera coursework to actually get that job and be qualified for that job that's out there?
It's a great question, and I think that's actually a lot of what we're seeing with this growth in global enrollments, but especially in female enrollments, right? Many people, but in particular women, dropped out of the labor market during the pandemic, including to care for children and other family members. They anticipated wanting to go back to work when childcare and other family constraints ease, and they know that developing incremental job-relevant skills now can help them do that, can help them re-enter the workforce in a better position than they left. And this isn't just about the pandemic. There are more and more jobs that are requiring digital skills. Digitization of a lot of customer-employee workflows has certainly been accelerated during COVID. And so while women have on average been very busy during the pandemic, I have two little ones myself, the busyness is real. They've disproportionately managed to make the space to develop these new skills, to prepare them to re-enter the labor market, and potentially to even re-enter in newer and more rewarding positions that are faster growing and more lucrative than their former roles, and really meeting that increased demand for digital skills.
Tell us about who has been taking Coursera courses and how that's different from what we saw pre-pandemic and how that's evolved. Like who is the ideal user of the product? Or typical, I should say, not necessarily ideal, typical.
Yeah, so our learners are very heterogeneous. We actually have just shy of 90 million registered learners on the platform, including over 16 million from the U.S. And I would say that during the pandemic, we've seen a couple of major shifts in the composition of those individuals, although they continue to be very diverse in their backgrounds and goals and interests. One major change has been, as I mentioned earlier, disproportionately women joining the platform to learn across the board, but especially in STEM and preparing for digital jobs. And then the second big shift we've seen is increasingly folks coming to Coursera not just to upskill in their current roles, but actually to prepare themselves to enter new jobs, including entry-level digital jobs. So think things like, how do I become a Google IT support specialist? How do I become an entry-level data analyst, a social media marketer, a data engineer? Early days Coursera, a lot of the folks who joined the platform were folks who already had advanced degrees, including graduate degrees. Now, increasingly, we're seeing people coming in who are in blue-collar jobs. Their work is being disrupted with increased automation, and they're looking for that gateway certificate program that can really be their foot in the door to an entry-level digital job. And that's been awesome to see. We survey learners. We ask them about the outcomes they're experiencing. The vast majority report positive career outcomes, improving their performance at work or selecting a new career path. And where we see the strongest outcomes is from those professional certificate programs, especially the entry-level ones, which are, again, aimed at preparing folks for those entry-level digital jobs.
So a question about this. How much is this replacing people's need to go back to professional schools? The reason I ask that is because we're sitting here in a country where so many people are saddled with so much student debt. And there's a lot of questions about whether we can recreate the model so that school, training, gaining skills is both more affordable and most useful for the workforce. So are people doing professional certificate programs rather than going back to school?
Absolutely. And, we actually have a range of learning programs from, individual courses to professional certificate programs all the way up to full diploma-bearing degrees. But you hit the nail on the head that it needs to be, one, affordable, and then two, flexible, right? In today's world, learning can and should be done on your own time. You can take a class from the world's best instructors while cooking dinner or driving the kids to the park. And when you have to do hands-on applied learning, where you really need to be at a computer, you can also do that on your own time in whatever little pockets you can find for you. And so I do think a lot of it is cost reduction, being able to access this without going into serious debt. But there's also a real component around being able to continue to live your life, keep your job, be with your family, and progress in your career through online learning that then can unlock future career opportunities.
That's Coursera's VP of Data Science, Dr. Emily Sands. Still to come on at Bloomberg Business Week, back to school means it's time for back to school shopping. We're going to hear from the CEO of Land's End. This is Bloomberg. This podcast is brought to you by Darktrace, a global leader in cybersecurity AI. Darktrace protects over 5,000 organizations worldwide from cyber threats such as ransomware, insider threat, and attacks on cloud applications. Its self-learning AI understands your unique business in order to identify and interrupt cyber attacks in seconds without disrupting day-to-day activity. Learn more at www.darktrace.com.
Broadcasting from the financial capital of the world, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Land's End sees sales rebounding as in-person classes resume, underscoring the broad strength that retailers are seeing in the crucial back-to-school shopping season. Jerome Griffith, the CEO of Land's End, joined Ed Ludlow and me this week to give us an update on supply chain challenges and how the company has had to raise wages to find workers.
Even prior to the pandemic, one of the things we wanted to do was to sort of spread the risk. We have been producing about between 42 and 45% of our products out of China up going into 2018. We began to expand that out into other countries so that we weren't really dependent so much on one country at all. What's happened to us over the course of the last, let's say, year to year and a half is that products getting into the States have started to slow down dramatically, and costs have really risen. Not just costs on shipping, but costs on raw materials. So you see cotton costs, and we do a lot of cotton, rising pretty significantly. But then you look at just the cost of shipping things from any country here, whereas containers 3 years ago were costing around $4,000 a container. The last 6 months, they've been up in the $12,000 to $15,000 range, and I've heard quotes as high as $25,000 for a container. And the same things happen with air shipping. Not that we ship a lot by air, but those costs have been going up as well. So, we will continue to look at expanding our network to make sure that we have a little bit more options than just going to 1, 2, or 3 different places in order to get products made and shipped.
Jerome, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. I love speaking to the retailers because you have such a lens into what's going on in our US and global economy. Supply chain, one thing. I want to talk a little bit about the labor market. How at Land's End dealing with a pretty tight labor market. I mean, how are you staffing stores, facilities? You guys seem to be seeing some growth now in e-commerce. What is the priority for hiring?
E-commerce really runs out of our corporate office, and that's 95% of our business. So that's been running along relatively well for the last few years. Our core businesses are U.S. direct e-commerce business, and then if you add on the international businesses and the B2B businesses, which we do online, it creates quite a large annual volume. What's happening with these businesses is we've been able to hire people because we're an interesting company, and the company's also doing well. So that tends to attract people. Where we struggle somewhat is just logistically how we ship goods out to customers. We are based in Wisconsin. We have 3 major facilities there, and we're a major employer in southern Wisconsin. What you've seen with the labor market as of the last 6 to 9 months is people aren't working as much. So it's been very difficult to entice people. We've given 2 raises so far this year. We've put on peak incentives for people to come into work, and we've had people working, overtime just to get the goods out the door. We have just made it through our back to school peak, which actually worked out okay for us, and we'll be going into another hiring phase. And it'll be determined, whether the people that have been getting unemployment and staying home are going to be ready to come back to work because then unemployment stops.
Do you think they will be?
Today in most places. I think so, and I hope so, but I have learned in the last year that I don't know.
Jerome, when you say you've had to raise wages twice, what are we talking about here? Where are they right now?
Depends on your average. We've raised them between 3% and 4% in May, and another 1.5% just this past month. And obviously, starting salaries are over $15. So we've been doing the right thing by the market, and the market really dictates what you need to do for the people that have been with you for a long time, because we're a 58-year-old company. Right. We've had people that have worked for us for 20, 25, 30, 35 years, and very loyal employees, and you want to make sure that they're happy.
Jerome, I'm a Brit acclimatizing to life in the United States, so I kind of asked this hesitantly, but should we talk about the holiday season,
which is a good job. You're becoming
fast
American.
Approaching? Everyone keeps telling me fast approaching the holiday season. How's it looking from your perspective?
I think the holiday season is going to be dependent on getting goods here. This would be my 43rd Christmas since I graduated college, and everyone gets just a little bit harder. But what we think, and we've seen pretty good demand coming up until now. We haven't seen a huge slowdown in demand. We think demand's still going to be there, and every year, it ends up coming around because people always end up going out shopping for Christmas. I think the people that are going to win, and this is our mentality, are the people that service the customer. If you're servicing the customer, you'll win. Yes, maybe your cost might be a bit higher, but as long as you can service the customer and keep them happy and keep them coming back, you'll continue to win as a brand.
How early do you want consumers to order from you for the holiday season?
People start now. And we saw it last year, and we saw it for back to school this year. People started ordering early in back to school, and they started ordering more. And my sense is the same thing's going to happen this year: is that people will shop early and they'll want to buy more because they've had pent-up demand and they have good savings right now, and people will want to spend.
That's Land's End CEO Jerome Griffith. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Coming up, we're ending the week with a beer and a look at how the booze industry is working on gender diversity. We hear from the head of Heineken USA, Maggie Tymony. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic from Bloomberg Radio.
Here at Bloomberg Business Week, we talk a lot about and we report a lot about gender equity when it comes to representation at the top companies in the United States and at the top companies in the world. Well, the gender diversity in the alcoholic beverage industry has historically been not so good. It's been male dominated. But one company is trying to shed a little light on that and changes that have been made in recent years. That company is Heineken USA, and we have Maggie Taimani joining us now, Chief Executive Officer of Heineken USA. She joins us on the phone from Connecticut. I was joined by my Bloomberg Quick Take co-host, Katie Greifeld. So Maggie, Heineken USA has a new white paper out titled Behind the Label, Gender Diversity in the Alcoholic Beverage Industry. What prompted you to take a deep dive into this topic?
Hi, Tim. How are you? Good afternoon. Greetings from Connecticut. Yes, we are. I'm a woman and I've been in the alcohol beverage industry for many, many years. And I looked around the room over the years and I don't see many diverse faces. So Heineken USA took a leadership position and got with a cohort of senior females across alcohol beverage. And we had a discussion and we said, it's really incumbent upon us to highlight the path and pave the way for the future generations of women. And I think, it's easy not to do anything to raise the profile of and highlighting the path for females in our future females in our industry. But we said it's incumbent upon us to take on that task and put it firmly on our shoulders.
And so how do you do that? Is that through recruitment or advancement for women already in the industry, or I imagine some combination?
I think it's a combination. The two things. When consumers when they think about Heineken USA, they think about the brand, and the same with other AlcBev companies. So I think we need to ensure that we market the people behind the beverages and the actual industry behind the beverages. These are fully blown businesses with P&Ls and breweries and marketing departments and finance departments and HR departments and sales departments, etc. That's number one. Let's market our industry for others. Number two, we need to elevate our recruiting programs. We don't do enough to ensure that we have a breadth and depth and scope of coverage across, different universities, and to highlight in particular to females, you can have a big opportunity in alcohol beverage.
Maggie,
at the same time, Katie, I think we also need to level the playing field to ensure that we're very flexible in how we show up at work and where you can work. You can work from home. You can work from an office. We need to highlight that to all of our future talent.
Give us some numbers here. Give us some data about what you found in the industry and how it compares to other industries, because I think it's fair to say there are many industries when it comes to the corporate world that are dominated by men.
Yeah, when we look at recent studies, the percentage of women in C-suite roles across the marketplace remains relatively small. We all know that. It's circa 21%. When we look at women in C-suite roles in food and beverage, it's a little bit lower at 20%. However, when we look at women in C-suite roles in food and beverage distribution, it's just 10%. And, when you look at general C-suite roles, we know that it's dropped from 24%. So, we talk a lot about gender diversity and females and their careers, but the numbers are showing that we're actually going in the wrong direction. So how do we sustainably bring these numbers up and keep them up and then build off that base? That's our challenge across all industries, and in particular, our focus on AlcBev.
And so, Maggie, you mentioned that the numbers are going in the wrong direction. I'm curious what role the pandemic played in that, because obviously it's been a while since myself has been at an in-person conference, just meeting people organically to network. How does that factor in that we've all been virtual for really a year and a half?
Yeah, I think, if I can link that a little bit to mentorship and allyship, when you look at females in the workplace, we need to be more flexible because the female voice is not heard when you're not in the room. And I think being virtual has not helped females in terms of their progression or even staying in the workforce. So how do we move away from mentorship and move towards allyship so that when you're not in the room, somebody is speaking and your voice is heard via somebody else on your behalf?
Hey, Maggie.
And at Heineken USA, I just want to say that we've done it. We, over 10 years ago, we launched the Women's Leadership Forum. We have 48% females at Heineken USA. And globally for Heineken, we're looking to increase to 30% females in leadership positions, senior leadership positions by 2030. We have made that commitment.
Well, it's interesting because I look at your website in preparation for this interview, and something sticks out to me. Brands that are about substance rather than status, social rather than exclusive, personalized rather than mass. That's what you consider your portfolio of, quote, upscale international brands. I'm wondering how this report dovetails with the identity that you want consumers to have when they pick up a Heineken, or when they pick up a Dos Equis or an Arizona Sunrise Hard Seltzer or one of your emerging brands.
We are a family-owned company, Heineken globally. And I'm not sure if you know this, Tim, but we are majority owned by the Heineken family. Yeah. And Charlene Heineken is our owner and our founder. So we put a lot of focus, and we put our money where our mouth is when it comes to gender diversity and inclusion and diversity globally at Heineken. So we ensure that our advertising includes diverse consumers, because our brands are consumed by diverse consumers. We ensure that our agencies are diverse. We ensure that the communities in which we operate, that we provide a diverse lens to all of the philanthropic efforts that we make.
And so, Maggie, Heineken, matches its words with actions. But again, I keep going back to your point that at an industry-wide level, the numbers are going the wrong way. The gender disparity is getting worse. How does that reverse? What would be the catalyst to actually make the numbers go in the right direction? And how long might that take?
You know what? It really could take a long time, which is why we at Heineken USA, together with other across the industry, other senior females, are launching this campaign to look behind the label. We want to showcase our industry to people, to consumers, to showcase what's behind the beer they're drinking, what's behind the wine they're drinking, what's behind the spirit they're drinking. Because there's a lot of fantastic people who love this beautiful industry, and we're so proud to work for this industry. And many who have left the industry always say, oh God, I really want to go back. So behind the label, our first chapter in our book is to showcase the people behind the industry so that our consumers and society at large can look and say, I admire that industry and I want to work there.
I want to talk a little bit more about the business and get an update on you from the business. Many people may not know that Heineken USA is the parent company of Red Stripe, Strongbow, Tiger, Amstel Light, among many other beers and spirits. I wonder about emerging areas. I wonder about innovation. Where are you really bullish? Where are you seeing growth?
I think, years and years and years ago, it was the bigger brands, lagers, and consumers were happy with that. I think with the advent of social media, and there are really no boundaries between countries anymore. There's no geographic boundaries because people are on their phone, iPad, surfing the net, and they're experiencing brands in different ways. And people can say, well, is that a big challenge? That's really an opportunity that we can take our global brands from around the world and have them show up for our consumers in their locale and how our consumers want them to show up, number one. Number two, we have a huge opportunity to innovate. The lines for consumers are very, very blurred. And what they're looking for in a product, whether it be lower calorie, lower alcohol, or with our own Heineken 0.0, no alcohol, we need to ensure that we are innovating at speed and being extremely agile and nimble to deliver for our consumers what they want. And consumers today, Tim and Katie, are very promiscuous. They're going to try a plethora of different products, and we need to make sure that we are adapting and being fast to market to satisfy those consumer needs.
Hey, just in the last 30 seconds we have with you, Maggie, you piqued my interest when you talked about the no alcohol beer, the Heineken version of that. What type of growth are you seeing there? Because we have spoken recently to the CEO and founder of Athletic Brewing, who's raised a lot of venture capital money and sees growth just off the charts in about 20 seconds.
Yeah, we are still seeing in year 3 double-digit growth, high double-digit growth.
Wow.
And a lot of new consumers actually coming into the beer category. And it was just fantastic that our brewers took 20 years to develop what I think is the perfect product, Heineken 0.0. Please, if you haven't tried it, go out and try it. It is phenomenal.
That's Maggie Tymony, the head of Heineken USA. And that wraps up the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week from Bloomberg Radio. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Tim Stenivek. Be sure to tune into our Bloomberg Business Week daily show. It airs Monday through Friday and starts at 2 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. You can also watch our daily broadcast on YouTube. Just search Bloomberg Global News. Also, check out our Bloomberg Business Week podcast. You can find it at Bloomberg.com, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Business Week is available on newsstands now at Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can also see me at Bloomberg Quick Take, available on Bloomberg.com/QT and streaming platforms like Roku, Apple TV, Samsung TV, and more. Have a great weekend. This is Bloomberg. This podcast is brought to you by Darktrace, a global leader in cybersecurity AI. Darktrace's AI understands your business in order to stop the disruption caused by cyber breaches, including ransomware and insider threat. Learn more at www.darktrace.com.